Hello and welcome to the Spiked podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked. Delighted to be joined as ever by Spiked Editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And returning from MCC Brussels, Jacob Reynolds.
Hello.
Loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing Labour's betrayal of the grooming gang victims, the woman jailed for a tweet, and John Oliver's sermon in favour of men in women's sports. And just a quick reminder that we have a brilliant event coming up on Tuesday with Julia Hartley-Brewer and Brendan O'Neill live on Zoom. If you're a Spike supporter, you can grab your free ticket now by going to the Supporters Hub. If you're not a supporter, then why not sign up now? Become one. You won't regret it. You can find out about the event and how to become a supporter by going to spiked-online.com/events. So this week, Labour announced that some of the local inquiries that it had promised into grooming gangs will now not go ahead. Initially, it rejected calls for a national inquiry into grooming gangs and said that local inquiries were the answer. Now only Oldham is to get a local inquiry. The rest are going to be given what Jess Phillips calls a flexible approach to inquiries. Tom, that's just a euphemism for saying that not much is going to happen. There's not going to have much teeth to these investigations.
No, absolutely. It's just another insult to the victims to put with all the others where the grooming gang scandal is concerned. I really think this climb down, plus the way in which it was delivered, really demonstrates how unseriously, how insulting the Labour Party's response to this scandal has been, even though it has affected literally thousands of people in many cases in their own constituencies. The fact that this was rushed out 45 minutes before Parliament broke for recess, clearly a good day to bury some shameful news given all that's going on in the world. You know, Elon Musk is probably sufficiently distracted with the trade war to fire up his X account again. It was only in January that they promised these 5 localised inquiries into grooming gangs, among some other things. And even that was essentially not seen as sufficient in the context of calling for a national inquiry, which would actually have statutory powers, the ability to compel witnesses and so on. These local inquiries were never going to have that. And now they've gone from 5 to 1. As you say, these other 4 places are going to be offered some kind of more flexible approach, but it really just looks like a kind of fig leaf, really, to mask what's going on. And it's also worth remembering that what started this whole kind of part of the grooming gangs saga, the part of the grooming gangs controversy, was when members of Oldham Council were saying we need a national inquiry because the local one will be insufficient. So once again, you see how unseriously this is being taken. I thought the way in which the discussion in the chamber was pretty revealing. Jess Phillips was kind of bristling a lot of the criticism that was coming her way. There were Lib Dem MPs who got up to inveigh against the Conservatives for making too much out of this, or for daring to talk about this specific crime, this specific horror story that we've seen repeated of predominantly Pakistani Muslim men preying on predominantly poor and working class girls, and that being essentially covered up or ignored because of the fact that they were the wrong kinds of victims and the wrong kinds of perpetrators. How dare you draw attention to this specific horror that's repeated itself so many times across the country? It's estimated in around 50 towns and cities across this country. To see them bristle, to see them squirm, it was a really unedifying spectacle. But I think it's unfortunate to say that the survivors in this have become accustomed to this kind of betrayal, this kind of can kicking. And it seems like it was just another shameful example of that, really.
Yeah, definitely. Labour really just does not want this issue to be discussed, right?
Yeah, well, the thing that's so striking about this is that it's become the one issue time and time again where you're not allowed to have a proper kind of investigation, proper national discussion, proper debate. It's the one issue because it's so kind of perfectly poised in its awfulness and it hinges on all the things that you're not allowed to care about, right? You're not allowed to care about young working class people, especially young working class girls. Absolutely not. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that the way that the Labour movement has degenerated into something completely else in these towns that used to be its heartlands. You're not allowed to talk about the difficulties that we've had with certain ethnic groups, right? And so you put all these things together and it becomes this one issue that no matter how big the outrage becomes in the broader public, it's just not allowed to kind of penetrate into the media bubble inside Parliament. And so it's become almost a defining issue for the political class that this can't be properly investigated. And I think it also reveals the way that the inquiry obsession that we have in the UK, and I know that a national inquiry would be better than what we have at the moment, which is nothing. But It's in some way, the way they've talked about this flexible approach just kind of gives a lie to what these inquiries were always to begin with, right? The purpose of an inquiry is precisely to be so flexible that you dance around doing anything properly. The purpose of an inquiry is to hand power to technocrats and judges and avoid it becoming a properly political or democratic discussion. And so, in a kind of perverse way, these mini inquiries, victim-centered statements, and all the rest of it are actually the logical endpoint of the inquiries to begin with. And we really, I don't think anybody, even on the most kind of extremes sections of the right or something, nobody's got a really good answer about how we reckon with this as a society and what's needed to really get to the bottom of it and really prosecute and kind of turn a page on what was an awful chapter of British history.
Definitely. And Tom, it doesn't, I mean, of course, a lot of these crimes happened in Labour areas, Labour-run councils, but it is deeper than that for the Labour Party. It's touching at, almost like their newer ideology of multiculturalism and identity politics.
No, I think that's an important point because I'm sure that part of the calculation here is the fact that you've got a lot of these councils are Labour-run, certainly were Labour-run when these grooming gangs were running amok and continue to run amok in certain parts of the country. So not wanting to air that dirty laundry, you don't have to be some kind of conspiracy theorist to think that might be part of the calculation amongst some people. There's also the charge which has been levelled on that this is fundamentally about concern about what this will do with inner city Muslim voters who Labour Party they seem gripped by this genuinely quite racist assumption that if you criticise Pakistani paedophiles too vigorously, that it might alienate British Pakistani voters, which is a despicable conflation to make, in my view. I'm sure that is part of it, unfortunately, that kind of thinking. But there is, as you say, this deeper problem, which is the grooming gangs horror is the most grotesque example, I think, of Labour's abandonment of the working class and its preoccupation with other ideologies, other issues. The fact that it has ignored this scandal, which has hit working class communities so hard. The fact that they almost didn't detect it for a very long time speaks to how kind of distant they've come from those communities. And the reason that there has been a reticence, both on the local level, and this goes not just for politicians, but also the police and so on, is because the British officialdom in general has kind of imbibed this sense that protecting the kind of PR image of multiculturalism is almost more important than protecting poor and working class girls from this kind of abuse. In the local inquiries that we have already had in places like Telford, in places like Rotherham, you see the same findings over and over again, which is that there was concern about dealing with this because there was concerns about, quote, sparking a race riot because they were afraid about being accused of racism. And also, in certain places, a disbelief of the victims themselves because they were basically dismissed as wayward, drugged up teenage prostitutes, effectively. So you see the kind of fundamental kind of class hatred which is in place there. And also that shift away from the Labour Party in particular, supposedly being the political wing of the Labour movement there to give voice to the concerns and the lot of the working class, to being primarily interested with managing the image of multiculturalism, which seems to me so profoundly misguided because of the fact that the refusal to tackle this surely has sowed far more discord, far more distrust than and it just seems like even on its own terms it's spectacularly backfired, but it tells you a lot about what the Labour Party used to be and what it is now, I think.
This episode of the Spike podcast is sponsored by AG1. Now, working in a busy industry like journalism, it's all too easy for me to let my health slip. I just don't have the time to always cook healthy meals 3 times a day or to get to the gym as often as I'd like to. But I found a solution. I now know that I can take care of my health even when I'm at my busiest. That's because a friend put me on to AG1, and thank God they did, because it has honestly changed my life. AG1 is a quick, easy way to fill yourself with more than 70 vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and gut-friendly bacteria. And all you need is 1 scoop a day. The biggest thing I've noticed since I've started drinking AG1 is just how much more focused and energized I feel. Each scoop of AG1 is full of minerals like copper, chromium, and phosphorus, which are vital in unlocking all of the energy in our food. AG1 is also great for the immune system and gut health, and I've seen huge improvements in my skin as well. But the biggest thing for me is the convenience. I drink it before I go to work every morning, and all I do is mix 1 scoop in a glass of cold water. And now, honestly, I couldn't imagine starting the day any other way. And right now, I've got a very special offer for you worth £82. Subscribe now and you can get an AG1 welcome kit. It contains 5 AG1 travel packs, a bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2, and a fetching cap that says morning person. And all of that comes free with your first subscription. Just go to drinkag1.com/spiked to get a hold of yours. AG1 has added the cap as a special gift in the welcome kit, but only for a limited time or while stocks last. If you want to grab one, act fast. Just go to drinkag1.com/spiked. That's drinkag1.com/spiked.
That local story that you talked about has now become writ large. So if the local story was a kind of a reluctance to get to grips with the problem for fear of sparking some kind of race riots or concerns about Muslims or something, that's now writ large. They won't engage with the issue as a whole at a national political level for the same reasons. They're too concerned about, as you say, managing the image of multiculturalism, so concerned about what people might think about the scale of this should it be revealed in some kind of profound and national way. And the inevitable consequence of this is that the wound continues to fester and that we never get to the bottom of what really happened, and we're never able to kind of come to terms with one of the scale of what went on is something that in any other country, if you were looking at it from abroad, you would think this was like the kind of thing that they have memorials about, right? The kind of thing that is considered a shameful chapter in history. And we're not, the longer we're not allowed to properly reckon with this, the bigger a problem it will be when it comes.
Yeah, and it is worth pointing out that, while the police were reluctant to deal with rapists, they were quite happy to lock up or arrest some of the victims when they made complaints. I mean, there was one girl called Girl H who comes up in some of the reports around Rotherham, and she made her first reports to the police when she was 11 years old. Police did nothing about it. Police find her with a man. They find explicit photos of her on his phone. They do nothing about it. The police, another time, find her in an abandoned house with other girls and other grown Asian men, and they arrest her for being drunk and disorderly. They've arrested parents for trying to intervene and stop their children from being abused. I mean, it is so shocking the lengths to which they will go, really, to avoid causing multicultural upset. But also the victims are, I guess, they're seen as, in a way, part of the problem. Why are they raising complaints about this perfect multicultural utopia we've created? They need to be shut up.
No, absolutely. You see the contempt for the victims and their families. You also see, as we've been touching on, the kind of contempt for the broader public. There is generally been this conviction. When they say they're worried about race riots, what they're basically saying is that the British public are a kind of pogrom in waiting.
Yeah.
That if you talked about this issue too openly, if you tackle what are clear-cut cases of industrial scale rape, mutilation, murder, trafficking, that we wouldn't be able to handle it. People would fly off the handle. And on the flip side of that, there's also, again, as we've touched upon, this really unpleasant, quite racist assumption, which is to tackle this issue too vigorously would be to alienate British Pakistani Muslims in particular and Muslims in general. It's a grotesque thing to suggest, not least because there have been various people who have been over the years kind of blowing the whistle within the Pakistani Muslim community about what has been going on. So it's one of those things where the contempt for the public as well as contempt for the victims is a through line in so much of this. And it's going back to your point, Fraser, about just like the lengths that they went to do this. It really does strike me that we have a political class which is so preoccupied with looking good that it really fails to do good, to act in a quite basically moral fashion. And I actually think the kind of bristling from Jess Phillips that we saw in the chamber was a bit of an example of that. This is someone whose entire view of herself is wrapped up with the idea that she's on the side of victims, but because she's a prisoner of both her own ideology and her own party, she finds herself essentially paring back what was already a pretty pared back response to what is a genuinely national scandal. And there will always be arguments about whether or not the national inquiry was the right way to go. Oftentimes, as you're alluding to, Jacob, becomes an activity in kind of can kicking, that it's going to report back, 10 years hence, cost a hell of a lot of money and tell us loads of things that we already knew. I mean, I suppose the counter is that because there was so much cover-up involved here, actually getting a sense of the full scale could be useful. But even if they could really lean into some of the things which have been successful, for instance, this task force that was set up in 2023 under the sort of dying days of the last Tory government, which is really focused on finding victims, finding perpetrators. They just made their 1,000th arrest. I think it's telling that we're not really hearing very much about that.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, it was something that the last government put in place, but that's a place where you could really see clear-cut justice. Why not put more resources, more attention into that, actually finding, locking up, deporting where they're foreign nationals, perpetrators. Even that is something that evades them because they're concerned more about the narrative than they are about the victims. I think that's plain for everyone to see.
I'm sure people are sick and tired of hearing about adolescents by now, but you have one fictional TV show that results in days and days and days of media coverage, screening in every school, Keir Starmer talking about this important documentary non-stop, which is obviously not a documentary. And yeah, if you have a real world issue that involved hundreds, thousands, who knows, innumerable numbers of young girls and true level of awfulness, and this is something they're deeply uncomfortable about. There'll be no lessons in schools about the grooming gang.
This episode is also sponsored by Shopify. Now, there has never been a better time to start your own business. So many people I know are giving up the corporate grind to become their own boss. And you know what? With the right tools, it really doesn't take long before you start hearing this sound. Yes, that's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one e-commerce platform that you need to start, run, and grow your own business. No matter what you're selling, whether it's skincare or swimwear, Shopify makes selling online simple so you can focus on the one thing that matters, growing your business. One of the reasons millions of businesses around the world have chosen Shopify is because of its simplicity. No matter what you know about business or online technology, Shopify makes it really, really easy for you. One of the reasons millions of businesses around the world have chosen Shopify is because of its simplicity. No matter what you know about business or online technology, Shopify makes it simple. It covers all of your sales channels, and it even takes care of selling across those vital online marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Once you start selling, Shopify makes getting paid easy by accepting all credit card types. And if you're a bit of a digital nomad, Shopify's central dashboard allows you to manage payments, shipping, and orders no matter where you are in the world. This is possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up now for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So let's talk about Lucy Connolly. This is the wife of a Tory councillor and childminder who was jailed in the wake of the riots, not for rioting, but for a tweet. Now, we should say that the tweet was pretty disgusting, pretty racist. She tweeted about, setting fire to asylum hotels, hang the bastards for all I care. Really quite disturbing stuff. But she was sentenced to jail for 31 months. She legally is entitled to temporary leave, but repeatedly she has been denied it by the people in charge of the prison. Tom, it feels like her punishment is not only, we would think it's unjust being pro-free speech campaigners, but it's unusually cruel. Mm-hmm. It's unusually harsh, even in those normal circumstances.
No, exactly. I think Alison Pearson's big sort of expose on this really lays out in detail the level of harshness, the level of unjustness in terms of not being granted the ability to go home, despite being quite clearly not a threat to those around her. It is, of course, worth saying, as you suggest, that the tweet itself was obviously despicable, not so much calling for, but certainly revelling in the prospect of migrant hotels being set on fire. No one should defend that statement. But at the same time, it was deleted shortly afterwards. The idea that this in and of itself sparked the racist violence and arson that we saw across the country is a ridiculous proposition. And particularly when you stack it alongside the completely skewed approach that it shows. I mean, people often compare, when we're talking about sort of two-tier justice, people being locked up on social media in comparison to other things. I mean, if you take just the context of immediately after Southport, and Ian Akerson wrote a piece for us about Lucy Connolly this week, where he points out that there was someone who was engaged in a riot in Southport, targeting that mosque, who received a lesser sentence than Lucy Connolly did. That's absurd. And I think tells you something about the preoccupation that the criminal justice establishment and the government has with speech over even action, you know. And I know people will say this is this particular tweet is obviously of a different character to some of the things that we've seen people locked up for in recent years. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we make that really clear distinction between speech and action. You know, incitement is absolutely a crime, and it is even in America, the land of the First Amendment, with very strong free speech protections. But you have to draw that line very carefully.
Yeah.
In America, they're very clear on the basis of all the kind of jurisprudence they've built up over the years that if for something to be incitement, it has to actually be incitement. This is about where you're moving from pure speech into actually essentially commissioning and encouraging and calling for criminal acts, that it has to be something which is both intended and likely to cause imminent lawless action. Can we really say that about someone jabbering darkly into the Twitter sphere before deleting the tweet a couple hours later? Obviously not. But I think it's a reminder as well that aside from all the other bizarre warped priorities that it's revealed, that if we're going to have free speech, we really need to fight for it, even in the really hard cases, even when the tweet in question is completely despicable.
Yeah.
Because it's there where you kind of maintain the principle, as it were. So yeah, there's a lot about this case which is really, really telling, I think, about where we are with free speech and with just criminal justice more broadly, I suppose.
Definitely. Jacob?
It's almost like we've ended up in a situation where going after speech has become more important, not just kind of coincidentally because we've got harsh laws on speech, but because controlling the narrative is so central to everything that the elites stand for, and that they recognize implicitly or explicitly, they recognize at some level that the grasp they have on the popular narrative is so kind of tenuous that challenges to it, even if they're otherwise pretty despicable ones, but any kind of challenge to it has to be taken more seriously even than the actions. So that's why it's really revealing. You give this example of the rioter versus the person with the Facebook post or Twitter post, is like the discrepancy there. And there's this growing sense that the controlling the speech is so important for them. And so this isn't the case in isolation at all. And that again, it touches on an issue that had a component, as we know, to do with race relations, whether that was kind of invention of the Twitter sphere or whatever, but that they intuited at some level that they have to go after these people, really throw the book at them for what they said, because having a kind of hold on the popular narrative is so important, and it is only going to get worse and worse the greater the divorce that we see is growing and growing all the time between those who control the courts and control the law and the media and all the rest of it, and the growing popular conception that there's something really wrong with wider society.
I thought it was interesting that the judge in Lucy Connolly's case made a point of insisting and stating blankly that it is a strength of our society that it's diverse and inclusive, which is an unusually political statement to make when sentencing someone.
No, absolutely. And it's worth saying that I suppose part of this is the fact that the way in which the British state kind of responds to riots is part of the picture here. So back in 2011, there were some crazy cases. I mean, of course, people who were engaging in the rioting and looting should have been sent to prison. And there is often this kind of hyperactive response in the midst of unrest to come down very hard and very quickly on those involved in it, because you're trying to stop the contagion, you're trying to kind of tamp out the fire, whatever, we understand that. But even where it was things like 2 teenagers who were given an remarkably long sentence in the wake of 2011 because they'd set up a Facebook event for a riot that never actually took place.
Yeah.
Just a couple of idiots. And we see that repeated here. But it is obviously given this much more charged political context, as you say. And the thing about the whole 2-tier justice discussion is that, first of all, there's so many different examples of it now, but it's really fundamentally eroding already pretty eroded trust in the criminal justice system. You think the desire to make kind of political statements off of the back of this just seems to me to be so incredibly misguided if you want anyone to believe they're going to get a fair shake when they go through the system. And there's cases of many people, I'm sure, that they'll come out of the wash in the months ahead because so many people pled guilty to a lot of those speech-related offences in the wake of Southport. But the ones where they didn't, like cases like Jamie Michael, who was represented by the Free Speech Union, also by Luke Gittos, who's one of our columnists, where he posted a video in the wake of Southport which didn't contain any incitement to racial hatred whatsoever. I mean, he seemed to have heard the rumour that was later debunked that Southport was the work of a Muslim asylum seeker, but he was just talking about the need to deal with the radicalised idiots in society and that we need to have a meeting or whatever. Seemingly on the basis of when he posted that message, the context in which he was posted, he was also arrested, hauled through the court, separated from his family, and it was only because of the fact that of his own bloody mindedness that he decided to ignore the brief that was supplied to him, the duty solicitor, and to keep fighting his own corner until the Free Speech Union got wind of him and then managed to give him the support that he needed, ends up being acquitted in a matter of minutes when it gets to actually a jury. So there's going to be, even though this is the Lucy Connolly case is one, there's going to be so many more of people who didn't even, engage in that kind of horrendous, hateful rhetoric about burning migrant hotels or whatever, who genuinely were just voicing reasonable concerns. Though a lot of those stories are going to come out in the wash, as I say, as more appeals take place and as more of these cases come to light.
And it's worth putting this even in the wider context, even outside of the riots. The scale of speech policing has just gone through the roof in recent years. A recent piece in the Times, put out freedom of information requests to every police force in England and Wales. It's now 30 people a day who the police are arresting just for online speech, just under two particular laws. And, that is a rise of 58% since before the pandemic. As it happens, fewer people are being convicted, interestingly, which suggests, perhaps what you were saying, Jacob, a bit of a divide between what the judiciary, what the legal system thinks and what the general public think, especially if people are being put before juries. But this problem is clearly out of control. And I imagine this data didn't include the year of the riots. So, it's going to jump even further, I guess.
Well, yeah, and then that coming only hot on the heels of the example of Hertfordshire police going after the person who said something nasty about their school, and it's really the coming together of three things. I think one, the obvious disdain that our ruling classes have for speech that they don't like, their inability to separate, as you say, words from actions, to bear any criticism, even if it sometimes turns very nasty and unpleasant. But the second thing is that the police are increasingly reduced to something that exists on the sidelines, and going online and finding something nasty that someone said is really, really easy. And you don't even have to leave the comfort of your desk to do it. Whereas actually investigating crimes, doing what used to be called proper police work, is increasingly difficult. But I think there's also a third thing, maybe a deeper thing here at play, which is revealed by this. You're right to draw the comparison with the riots in the early 2000s, in the early 2010s, is that I think there's some awareness among those who control the levers of power in the British state that the state's grip on power is kind of quite tenuous, and that we see bubbling up again and again these moments where there's a danger of genuine kind of law and order breaking down, because the degree to which the social contract, the sense of a two-tier society, is widening and widening, and that there is this, I think they intuit, there is this kind of growing discontent and the gutting of police forces, the kind of fraying bonds of society, all the things that as the tide kind of comes in and are being revealed. There is this sense that that the state's grasp on power is increasingly tenuous, and they don't really represent the society anymore. And so that, I think, also plays into their need to control what's said, because they're increasingly kind of concerned that they couldn't control what people do.
Absolutely. And just to tack on to that amazing survey in the Times about the 30 arrests a day now under malicious communications and the Communications Act, grossly offensive speech. This is something that doesn't even rise anywhere near the level of incitement to quote unquote racial hatred and so on that we've been talking about. It's worth saying that the last time those Times journalists, Charlie Parker in particular, did one of these surveys where they sent a bunch of FRI requests and looked at the data for police forces across the country, they came up with 9 people a day.
Yeah.
And already on that basis, Greg Luciano from Fire estimated that Britain is already arresting more people for speech crime today than America did during the first Red Scare.
Yeah.
If that's not a free speech crisis, I don't know what is. So at the very least, we can knock down the denialism that often confronts this issue, I think.
John Oliver, the British US-based comedian, did a special on his show last week tonight on the question of trans women in women's sports.
Peyton McNabb, a three-sport high school athlete who was hit in the face by a spike during a volleyball match. She suffered injuries, including a concussion, and I'm not saying she wasn't injured or that it didn't have some impact on her performance, but a lot of the groups heavily pushing this story seem to be overselling it. Last year, for instance, Peyton McNabb tweeted a video of her confronting a trans woman with the caption, "A man using the girls' bathroom at Western Carolina University, unreal." Ambushing strangers just minding their own business is not what girls' bathrooms are for. Girls' bathrooms are for gassing each other up, making best friends in 30 seconds, complimenting tops, tucking in tags and zipping up dresses while one girl says, "OMG, that lipstick looks so good on you."
Now, it's probably the first time we've seen someone give a vigorous defence of the right of men in women's sports, and it basically seemed to rely on essentially biology denial, denying that there is much difference between men and women physically. Tom, what have you made of it?
I mean, I'm tempted to make the sort of comparison, the old cliches, like the sort of Japanese soldier in the jungle doesn't know the war's over. You know, there was something so 5 years ago about that particular monologue, although it is worth remembering that whereas in the UK there's been a much more kind of concerted pushback against the horrors of quote-unquote gender medicine and all the rest of it, that in America, particularly state by state, that battle is very much just beginning in earnest, even with the sort of things that Trump has been pushing through.
Yeah.
It's just so utterly delusional. I mean, it was one of those things where I've heard these arguments, rebuffed and debunked so many times now. It was almost embarrassing watching him making these kinds of points. And the fact that whilst he was putting that together, or when it was going to air, we had this ridiculous situation of an all-male women's pool championship final in the UK. You think, can you possibly be serious? Because if you do allow a situation in which men are allowed to compete against women, an all-male final is what you're going to have in basically every competition before long. So, it's one that is tempted to kind of go through this line by line. We can if you want to, but it's just, it's all out there. Of course, the benefits of male puberty, the benefits of, even in a game like pool, just a larger frame, a larger size, and how that can give you a big advantage off of the break. This is obvious to anyone when you think about it for 5 seconds. Clearly, John Oliver hasn't thought about it for 5 seconds, I would say.
Spoken about it for 40 minutes, but not thought about it.
Yeah.
Jacob.
Well, yeah, as you say, there's like this sense that there are like actually important things happening in the world right now, like really substantial geopolitical changes happening in the world right now, and like that for the kind of liberal class represented by John Oliver, engaging with that is way too difficult.
Yeah.
So instead, you fall back on something that you're very comfortable with, which is talking about how this is some kind of horrible scare invented by nasty right-wing people, that people are getting knocked out in football matches by men, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas we know that this stuff is going on kind of door to door, but it does also represent the way in which that they cling to those last kind of vestiges of their kind of liberal order as at the moment as they're being knocked down. And you know that this wouldn't have happened had Trump not signed the executive order and being increasingly forceful on this issue. And it really is high time, and we need to see a far kind of more social, as has happened to some degree in Britain, which is one of the few things at the moment we can kind of be proud to be British around. But in America, it's definitely time for a broader kind of social movement against this. People involved in sports, as difficult as it is, need to, I think, begin to take a stand, and we begin to see some of that, but they need to take this a lot more seriously. But as for figures like John Oliver, sounds like a man from a different era, and never was funny. Glad that he's outside of our borders, and we just pray to God that Trump doesn't deport him back to us.
We really aren't sending our best. James Corden was out there for a long time. That was a complete mystery. But you do think as well, not to play this game, but like there's also a tremendous element of mansplaining to this when you really think about it. I mean, like it's like, listen, Riley Gaines, I know you weren't happy about having to compete against a biological male and see his nethers in the women's changing room, but actually, because that's who the pushback has come from. It's come from women within those sports. It's come from feminist campaigners and all the rest of it. You'd think even on that level, some of these people would think, maybe this isn't the best. Maybe I need to think a little bit more about this.
But this is what was sort of so, I was going to say so genius about the John Oliver thing, but so stupid and transparent, really, is that he really tried to paint it as a right-wing talking point. Yeah. This sort of far-right narrative, as if only Fox News hadn't covered it, then we wouldn't know the difference between a man and woman. I would think that women would have penises if it wasn't for some shouty person on the telly. And, when in reality, it's the exact opposite. Most people think that know what a man is, know what a woman is, and are pretending otherwise. And because, there's sort of liberal cachet around, embracing this kind of ignorance. So he's got it completely wrong on that front.
Well, of course, the irony is that if this is just a right-wing talking point, it's never happening in the world of sports. Why do you have to dedicate such a prime-time piece of television to defending it? Right? The fact is that they have to do it precisely because it is going on, and they can try and pretend it's not, because that kind of somehow works as a rhetorical device. But they know they're under serious pressure on this issue, and so they have to wield out. There's a kind of a shame for them that the biggest gun they can wield out is John Oliver. But they've had to do it.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.